The concern here is that if there is this investigation going on into Josh Simons, the Cabinet Office Minister, who is the former head of Labour Together, would these NDAs prevent former staff giving their account here?
In the Times this morning, employees at Labour Together have been gagged from talking about their work through the use of non-disclosure agreements, something the government has moved to ban. In the latest episode of the State of It podcast, Gabriel Pogren from the Sunday Times has been speaking about the scandal. He describes how the think tank set private investigators on him. Their secret report falsely accuses Gabriel of acting as a Russian agitator. Here's Gabriel talking about how his Jewishness was used to subvert his journalism.
I have to talk about it. One of the most senior figures in the Labour Party messaged us 24 hours after APCO had submitted its report onto Labour Together's desks, asking, Gabriel, there's a rumour that X, Y, Z. Is this true? And we've looked at my reply. I said, no, but also what? Where's this from? To which the response came, rumours. Well, they weren't rumours, actually. It was, as we now know, the contents of this investigation, which I should say as well, I'm trying not to dignify the contents too much. But it was, in the text, in what it said, an attempt to not just portray my career as a sham and the result of disingenuousness, dishonesty, and a hidden agenda on my part, but it actively portrayed me as somebody with deep roots in a particular political tradition with which I have no actual heritage or connection, but also that I might have willingly or otherwise been part of Russian attempts to destabilise British politics.
That's the brilliant Gabriel Pogren. You can hear more about what happened on the State of It podcast, on your podcast app or on the Times radio app. Let's bring in the Times assistant political editor, Geri Scott. Morning, Geri.
Good morning.
So you're reporting this morning on the think tank using NDAs for officials who are kind of leaving the organisation. Just tell us what you found.
Yeah, look, so first of all, we should be clear what we're not saying. What we're not saying here is that this is linked to that APCO report or any of that work that was gone on there. But what we have discovered, myself and my colleague Aubrey Allegretti, is that a large proportion of staff who has left Labour Together in recent years have been subject to NDAs. And look, NDAs are relatively normal in some workplaces in terms of protecting, commercial interests, sensitive information, that kind of thing. But the NDAs we're talking about here are expansive. The people that have been subject to them aren't even allowed to acknowledge that they've got these NDAs. So the concern here is that if there is this investigation going on into Josh Simons, the Cabinet Office Minister, who is the former head of Labour Together, would these NDAs prevent former staff giving their account here?
Yeah. There is a political irony, I suppose, to all of this, because the government has moved to ban the use of NDAs.
Yeah, in specific circumstances. So in cases of potential discrimination or harassment, that has been, the use of NDAs has been banned in that case under the Employment Rights Act. Also, victims or witnesses of crimes have been protected from being gagged. But, that doesn't cover all of them. But there has been an increasing kind of concern in recent years from transparency groups, MPs, those kind of people, about the overuse of NDAs. And look, we're not talking about state secrets here, are we? This is a think tank who is coming up with policy for the government. It may be that there are some areas, and Labour Together indeed do say that there are sensitive areas NDAs are needed for, but how expansive do they need to be, and are they just being kind of slapped on willy-nilly, and could that impact on any investigation?
Yeah, I suppose the launch-off point for all of this reporting was the Sunday Times article, which found that Labour Together had failed to declare over £700,000 worth of donations as part of the story. I wonder, Geri, as we go along through this thing with your and Aubrey's latest reporting this morning, what we're learning, I suppose, about the philosophy or the culture of Labour Together.
Yeah, and I think that is the question, right? The question will be, what was actually happening here? What was the work that was going on? I think, there are plenty of think tanks that are aligned with various political parties in Westminster and Whitehall. You kind of just assume that what they're doing is drawing up policy platforms, to be helpful for the future government, maybe, or the people that they are supporting. But there is a question mark here over kind of why you would fail to declare those donations in the first place, why you are commissioning a firm to investigate journalists, regardless of one of the reasonings here is that they say that the report went further than it was supposed to. They strayed outside of their brief. But why are you really commissioning reports on journalists in the first place if you're a think tank? And why also do your staff have to sign such restrictive NDAs? And I think there are still questions to answer.
Indeed. Geri, thank you very much for the update. We will keep in touch. That is Geri Scott, who is the Times Assistant Political Editor.